this session might be something that you already know, okay? But the question is if everybody in the company is in the same page as you are. And as I said before, this is an important part for the company to be aligned across the board. So you could think of it as a baselining exercise. And our experience shows that it's really important to see what SaaS is and what it's not. And I can tell you that in my discussions with different customers, this is in 80% of cases, it's a discussion. What is SaaS? Because it is, it's an evasive topic, at least depending from which perspective you look at it. So hopefully we'll demystify this a little bit now. And what we are doing today is we are looking at the SaaS from the software builder's perspective. We're not looking at it from the end customer perspective, and I'm going to show the difference, but just so that you're aware. I also present the fundamental concepts that constitute SaaS. So it might look a little techy. It will absolutely not look techy to the tech people, but it is about the concepts. And then the business transformation will be covered tomorrow. And just note that right after this session, the all cloud SaaS architecture fundamentals session is going to be right after. So don't run away if you can stay. Okay, let's move now in. But so before we start, I actually wanted to share with you how we picked the candidates, meaning the 15 companies that are now part of SaaS Lab, because that was intentional. And I believe it gives a view on how we think about SaaS, because this criteria is partially also what we are looking at when we are selecting our one-to-one engagements. And if you look at the C-level commitment, clear product timeline, or MVP launch or GA, or that you have a team in place, or that you have resources and capacity to actually deliver what's the requirements of the program, and that you're committing to it, right? So all of those have to be in place also on your side if you actually want to deliver a SaaS product. Because if you are, let's say, an on-prem company and starting with, yeah, we'll do something, and then the huge customer comes with a feature request and everything drops, then it's really hard to get there. So these were not all of them, but kind of criteria that speaks to the importance of commitment in building SaaS. And we've recognized this in all of you. So that's why you are here. Now let's talk about the SaaS mindset. First, let's look at the definition of SaaS as we have it, but from the end customer perspective, right? So that's a software distribution model in which the software provider hosts and manages a configurable software product in the cloud that customers can access over the internet based on an access fee. So it's a very broad definition, right? And it's valid. It covers many use cases, but you will see in the rest of the presentation that this is probably a bit broader or much broader than how we look at SaaS from the software builder's perspective. So let's dive into what SaaS is as a business model. So the first thing we need to ensure, which is kind of critical in the SaaS, is the agility. And the agility definitely comes from use of the cloud. So if you have your servers in the basement, agility is probably a little less than it is if you're using a cloud provider. And what it does, it helps you build software faster. It helps you change strategy direction. It helps you embrace changes that happen in the market that you have to go after. So you're not tied to any specific direction. Or even if you are, you could change it if the new circumstances arise. And what this helps you fuel is innovation. So if you are agile, you can produce more innovation. And ideally, you produce that innovation not just for yourself, but also for your customers, because this is what drives the adoption then in the future, right? And if you have all that, but you don't know how to operate it, you have a problem. And I think we actually, some of you might have that problem if you had a managed service offering and suddenly there was a spike in new customers. How do you manage that? And how do you patch all of those? And how do you operationally manage them? So this is a big part of SaaS, is that you achieve that operational efficiency, that when you have to scale, let's say the number of tenants, that you can do that with not proportional amount of internal resources that you need to employ. The next thing is that all of this should bring you to reduce cycle time, which means that you're able to produce your innovation faster and you're able to get it in the hands of your customers. So think about new feature releases, new versions, and also getting feedback from your customers and embedding it in that process so you can iterate, which is a premise of SaaS, which is very different than an on-premise software in majority of the cases. And I would say all of these actually fuels the growth that is, or it enables the growth that it's core to the SaaS business model. Because SaaS in itself is not meant to be a replacement for on-prem, but it usually is a way for you to either go after new markets, go after new geos, finding new use cases, right? So it's not just about converting your existing install base into SaaS. So usually that's not the case. Of course, it's part of it. It's just not the only thing. So the big change that happens from the ones that were or still are with on-prem software is that you are selling a service, not a product. So you're not throwing it over the fence anymore, like you used to do, and have a L1, L2, L3 support, but you actually have to live with it and operate it 24/7, right? So that requires a lot of changes. First one that it's really important is the frictionless onboarding. So you need to have that, depending, of course, on the product that you're having, but this is your first contact with the customer or your customer's first contact with your product. If that doesn't run well, it could be a problem for adoption, right? The next thing is time to value, which means how quickly can you get from signing up the customer and getting the product to them and actually that they get value out of this. And SaaS, by design, should enable that you do this much faster than with an on-prem product. Another one is loyalty, because what SaaS should enable is that you are able to collect the information from your customers, so the feedback, to see what works, what doesn't work, to see the metrics, and then iterate on that and create better experiences for your customers. And of course, it also creates some of the challenges, because if you're going for a multi-tenant solution, you want to offer unified operational experience to yourself, I mean, from your perspective, but that can create issues, let's say, with noisy neighbors or people using this in the wrong way, the solution. So you also need to be careful about that when you're building it. But all of that constitute the service experience, and it's different than, absolutely different than any on-prem solution. Now, there is no blueprint for SaaS. I like to say that there are 50 shades of SaaS, and probably there are more than 50, because it really depends on your starting point. So there is no universal one. We've heard today legacy monoliths building that are being broken up. We have already SaaS solutions. Some of them might be suboptimally developed at the moment, or managed or operated. So there is no universal starting point. So it's really hard to say, this is a document and go buy it and do it. If that would be the case, then of course everybody would have a successful SaaS business. But you all know that's really hard to do. And another point that is affecting this is that you have different business realities. So somebody might be a laggard and they really, really need to do something quickly. So they will take a different path than somebody who has developed a SaaS solution and they are actually going after that same company that is on-prem and it's chipping away their market share. So they have different problems. They might be a startup like you and they don't have a cash to go all out and grab market. So a very different problem than the ones that have to defend the market. And so there are many dimensions, and of course you know best which ones are there for you. and that determine which path you need to pick. And you will each build your own. So what we're trying to do here is to give you the guidance to help you build and run your course. And another misconception that we see is somebody has an application, so they have customers that they provide a service to. They are different versions potentially, they're operated in a different way, and they slap a bit of automation on top of it, maybe even some DevOps, and they say we have SaaS. So I would completely agree this is SaaS from the end customer perspective, because you could very much simplify what SaaS is, that you provide SaaS in a way that you give a link, username, password, and a bill to your customer. That's gross exaggeration, but this is what SaaS is, right? Customers don't have to care about anything else than using your application. But from the perspective of a builder, that's absolutely not the case. So I think we should look into a bit more what SaaS is and what it's not. So you could build, and there are some techies in this room, you could build the best possible architecture for your solution. Everything is bright. You passed well-architected reviews with flying colors. Everything is booming, right? But if you don't have those operational bits that we are going to get to in a second, it doesn't constitute SaaS, at least not in the way that we understand it in AWS. So just a great application is a starting point, but it doesn't constitute SaaS. So you need both of those parts to make it work. So then we get to the mindset of technology versus business. And what we usually see is that companies start to build or start to think about SaaS from technology perspective. That's most cases. And of course, a lot of times techies are the one that embrace cloud. And I've seen that over and over. And then the business follows or not, right? But the reality is that it cannot work this way. So the transformation actually needs to be business and technical together. And let me give you a very simple example. You want to build, for example, usage-based pricing, which means you want to sell something in a way that the customer wants to buy it from. So they need to see the value from the way you are selling this. You need to define the metric that speaks to them. So if you start from a technology perspective, how do you know what speaks to those customers? If you haven't done your market research, if you don't know who your customers are, if you haven't built the personas that you're targeting, because only in this way you can figure out what would be that metric that the customer really is willing to pay for, and then how you work backwards from there to have that metric in your system so that you can track it, you can put it in your billing system, that you can actually sell it to your customer or charge it in a way that it's efficient. So that's one example, but there are thousands of examples like this where business and technology interrelate, and you need to start working on it from both sides. So now we are getting to the kind of the crux of things. And let's see what it means to be SaaS. So we were talking about that great, perfect architecture, all microservices, all great, pooled resources, everything works. But this is the gray box in between or in the middle, right? So the definition of SaaS, or the critical thing about SaaS, is your control plane, if I call it this way. So how do you onboard the customers? How do you flow those identities in a multi-tenant environment to your through the application, so that you can monitor those tenants, that you can get the metrics out, that you can do the analytics, that you can actually do the billing and metering out of that. How do you manage all those tenants? How can you update them? How do you launch new versions? Are they all on the same version? Can you ensure that? So all of those blue boxes around is what for us means SaaS. And of course, the application in the middle, but it's a combination of both of these. So this is probably a slide that we as a team use most in customers' discussions. And I can tell you I had a 45-minute discussion on this slide with a customer because we just couldn't get on the same page. So something to think about, to ponder upon if that's not the way you're thinking about. Might be different for you. So, but that's the way, at least how we as AWS and SaaS Factory look at this. And then it's a usual discussion that at least I'm having. What is the difference, or what is SaaS, and if SaaS is MSP on the back end, or is SaaS really SaaS? So I think I was quite clear on that, what SaaS is, right? But if we look at a managed service to the end customer, it really looks like SaaS. But if you are not able to operate this, if you have customization built in for each of the customers, if you're maybe managing and deploying it in a different way, well, that's not the way how we look at SaaS. And as I said, there are 50 shades of SaaS in here. So you could have some of these parts and some of the SaaS control plane bits. And so you could be somewhere in the middle, or you could be in a journey to go there. But it's important to have in mind that these blue boxes are what we really should strive for. And give you an extreme example of a company that I'm talking to now. They have more than 1,000 environments deployed on AWS, highly customized. Each deployment is in a separate AWS account ID. And that's per se not a problem, but managing these environments is a nightmare. And the operational cost that they have is huge. And they have big growth plans, but it's really, really hard for operationally for them to make this work. I know it's an extreme example, but just want to showcase that why we think about SaaS as we do. But there is a but. There are realities that you are in. And for some of you, it might be completely irrelevant, right? Maybe your biggest decision is whether you go from a pool model, meaning shared resources, but you have a huge customer who wants to have all of the resources deployed separately in a silo model. And that's fine. SaaS solution should enable that. But for enterprise ISVs, or somebody who is building software or comes from a legacy place, sometimes they have multiple of those deployed, and they have to maintain that legacy. I was talking to a core banking solution provider. They need to keep their on-prem deployments for years, and I'm talking could be decades still, right? And so they need to figure out how they can go from one place to the other, and then what is also the best solution for them in terms of SaaS. Maybe SaaS is actually not the right model, right? MSP might be the perfect model for you. It's just something that you need to figure out what is the best for your use cases and for your customers. And if you say that you need to onboard 5 customers in the next 5 years, building a multi-tenant SaaS solution might not be the right way to go. But what we always advocate for is, and I hope that was clear during this presentation so far, that we are always preparing for growth, because we never know when that's going to hit. And for startups, that might be even more particular than it is for traditional software companies. So you need to build your core system in a way that, and all of those blue boxes, so that when the demand comes, you can actually do it. And also you need to architect your solution in the right way. So I just recently talked to a small startup, maybe 30, 40 people, have a multi-tenant SaaS solution. They don't have a proper SaaS in place, but they have fairly simple customers so far. But now they've landed the project, more than one, where the complexity of that is now 10x, and they have a problem on the architecture side and on the deployment side, right? So, and those are the trade-offs you need to look for, and they are now in a place where they really need to prepare for growth. And I'm pretty sure some of you are in that phase now, because that's also the way we chose the startups for this program, that you're not really at the beginning, so you already have an existing business, and you need to scale it. So that was one of the things we looked at. The next thing that we should be looking on when we are going towards the SaaS business and operating model is that sometimes we start from a narrow use case and from historical purposes. For example, now in this case, somebody was really focused on compliance and security. So we've built our solution in that way, which is perfect, but it could be too expensive for the rest of the market that might not have those same requirements. And now the question is, do you want to leave that market away? So first, are you aware that that market exists? And that's something that, your sales and marketing, biz dev and product managers need to figure out whether there is more market out there. Usually there is. And then if that's the case, you need to define those tenant profiles and see how you can build that into your solution. So the case I mentioned before, they have customers with 10 users and they have customers with more than 1,000 users. So it's a huge difference in complexity in the way they manage. But that's what they want to go into, or that's the direction they want to go. So they need to create those different user profiles to be able to cater them properly, right? Because if you want to scale, also let's call it on the right side, and you want to have many customers like this, then the onboarding experience potentially might be different for those than it is for the more complex customers. So these are a few factors that will impact your architecture choice. So compliance, I think I've pondered enough on this. So if you have compliance requirements, that might be influencing the way you're architecting your product. Noisy neighbors, I've also mentioned, that happens when somebody is using the solution either not the way you intended to, or you are allowing that use and potentially not sanctioning this through uh, your pricing structures. Um, this is why a tiering concept could come in place or could be very handy, where you would say, for the lowest tier, the standard tier, you will have a multi-tenant deployment, and customers have potentially different SLAs, and they might have different experiences. But if somebody wants to go for premium, you would go say, okay, so they might get a silo deployment, so all of the resources are deployed for them, and nobody can touch them. So you get away from that noisy neighbor problem. Global reach is another one. So we've seen today in the presentations we have, some of you are very regional, some of you are already global, right? So, but if you want to go global, you want to have global reach, you do need to think about your architecture in a different way than if you're just doing it for DACH, for example. And then the tenant isolation, which kind of speaks to the compliance and even to the noisy neighbor. So you need to think about the levels of isolation that you want to do or you have to do based on the customer requirements. Another concept I want to bring in is shared responsibility model. So hopefully all of you have seen that, because we are not, as AWS, are not responsible for everything you do in the cloud, right? So we take part and you take part. And this, what you see now, is the end customer view. And that is radically different to what your view is, and I'm going to show it next. So we take care of, or we are responsible for the security of the cloud, meaning the infrastructure, the way we structure our availability zones, how we protect our data centers, right? So how do we deploy and manage our Nitro system, meaning the virtualization platform? How do we provision compute, storage, all that? But then you are responsible for everything else, right, as a customer. And then, of course, depends on the service. So if you look at the EC2 instances, this picture would hold. If you take a service from us, like transcribe or anything, we would, of course, take bigger pie. So the orange part would be bigger. But what happens in SaaS world is that you, as a software builder, become responsible for the blue and the orange boxes. So, and that's a very different thing, right? Because you need to embed in your SLAs to your customers also us. Because if you have a true SaaS solution, that would happen, right? So the customer really takes care of the data, and yes, they might have you would federate their identities and stuff like this, but everything else is actually coming from you. And you need to be aware that, of course, you need to connect your the way you are operating your platform and the way you are setting the SLAs and everything, that you have to combine it with what we do or what we offer and what you want to offer. And you make a package out of this. So I hope that up till now, it became clear that SaaS is a team sport, and I've mentioned this before. And so if you are in the silos of technology being away from delivery and being away from the operating model, you need to bring this together. And this is the first step that you need to start doing. And I can tell you, in some customers, and that probably will not be your case, I saw that they don't even talk to each other. And so that's no way to start on a SaaS journey. It just doesn't fly. So now what I would like to do for the end is just to recap the attributes of a SaaS environment, maybe a bit more in detail, so that I guess our position gets quite clear. So what we really want to do is we see in SaaS that everything is deployed in a shared and single, meaning one way of doing it, and it's automated, this process of deployment. All the tenants are running on the same version of your application, which sometimes might be a challenge because you have to do customizations. So then the question is that through SaaS a right model for you? Or could you maybe bring that part of the customizations out of your product? Or can you make all of the customizations available to the product and then just turn them features on and off based on what you are offering to the customer or what they have sold, right? But is there a way to maintain a single code base and a single deployment of your solution? This is what we like and expect, let's say, from a SaaS environment. Or I don't like the word true SaaS, but you know what I mean. Customizations that we do, and I already mentioned that, so they are global. So if you are doing them, you put them in and you may or may not make them available to any tenant that you want, right? You have a single pane of glass through which you are operating all your tenants. So the way you look at them, the metrics, the updates, all of that should be done in the unified way. That also includes, of course, all the logging and metrics that you have, and all of this needs to be tenant aware. So if you are building a multi-tenant solution, and even if you are deploying it in a siloed model, you still want to track all those things and see how customers are performing, right? And if you have that tenant context, that can influence the way you're doing customer success, for example. The way how you see whether there are some problems occurring on specific tenants, and you can address them maybe proactively. And I've already mentioned that you can deploy the same application in different tenancy models. So that is, if you have a multi-tenant application, you could, most of the time, I would say, deploy it also in a silo model. You have regular updates to the product. Could be features, could be bug fixes, could be whatever, right? If you look at Amazon, there is I'm not sure what the number is now, but the numbers that we sometimes share in the slides is we have 64 million deployments in a year on Amazon. So, but that of course stems from the way we are organized, from the microservice architecture from the two pizza teams that we have, and independent teams that operate with microservices and handshakes between those microservices and APIs and all that. And most of you know this better than I do. And then the tiering can be a good way, and it's a lot of times used to differentiate between experiences of different tenants. And I went into this before already. And the last one is that, like the organizational units shouldn't be siloed, also the metrics need to be broadly available. You could call it a democratization of metrics for different purposes. Different parts of the org needs to have those metrics that are coming from the same place, so that they either can make a product better, make more efficient operations, make the architecture more streamlined, or just use it to have a better customer experience when onboarding on operating their solution. And then the last slide that I have is, so I hope you see that SaaS is more than just the application now. So it is a business model, and it's a complex one, that it starts from understanding what the needs are of the customers. Not necessarily your needs, that comes in too, but you need to start from the customer and work backwards. You want to have a one experience for the customers, although you might have different delivery models. And I guess so the tiers and the customer experiences that you want to target, you need to understand that, and we've mentioned that, so that you know what customers want, whether they're regulated, whether they're not, whether they're cost conscious or security conscious. You need to build for growth, and it requires you to step out of the silos. And I think this is the last one, that you need to focus on enabling, and this is throughout the company, agility, innovation, and operational efficiency, so that you make yourself operate better all the time, because it's not a one-time exercise. It's a journey that you are embarking on.